The champagne spilled over Amanda's dress when Marcus pulled her too forcefully close to him, but he didn't even notice. He was too busy observing the faces around the gala ballroom of the Pendleton Hotel in Chicago, searching for envy, admiration, perhaps even jealousy. That was what he wanted to see reflected in the eyes of the other entrepreneurs as he displayed his latest conquest, a 28-year-old blonde, all curves and ambition, hanging on his arm like a polished trophy. "Marcus, you're hurting me," Amanda whispered, trying to loosen his grip on her waist. He loosened his fingers just enough for her to breathe, but not enough for her to pull away. He needed everyone to see. He needed them to know that Marcus Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries, still had what it took to conquer a young, beautiful woman, even at 52. That he was still relevant, powerful, desirable. The ballroom was teeming with Chicago's business elite, all dressed in their finest attire, feigning civility as they assessed one another like predators sizing up prey. Marcus knew this game better than anyone. He had played it for 3 decades, clawing his way up every rung, stepping on anyone necessary. And now finally he was almost at the top. Almost. There was only one man between him and the place he believed he deserved: Sebastian Drake. The name alone was enough to make Marcus's jaw clench. Drake Industries had outperformed Caldwell for the 3rd consecutive year, and there was nothing Marcus detested more than coming in 2nd place, especially to Sebastian, with his arrogant smile and his irritating knack for turning everything he touched into gold. "I heard Drake isn't even showing up tonight," Amanda commented, adjusting the neckline of her dress. "Seems he has more important business in London." Marcus felt a wave of satisfaction. Perfect. A night without having to see that smug face, without having to endure the pitying glances of others when they compared the two companies. Perhaps he could finally enjoy the event. "Mr. Caldwell," a voice called to him from across the ballroom. Gerald Hutchinson from Hutchinson & Associates waved vigorously as he approached with 2 glasses of whiskey. "What lovely company you've brought tonight." Marcus smiled, pulling Amanda even closer. "Gerald, always a pleasure. You know Amanda, my executive assistant." Gerald's eyes glinted with mischievous understanding. Everyone knew what executive assistant really meant. Gossip had been circulating for months through Chicago's business circles. Marcus not only allowed them to circulate, he fed them. He wanted everyone to know that he had discarded his boring wife for something better, younger, more exciting. Evelyn. Her name crossed his mind like an unwelcome shadow. He hadn't thought of her in weeks, perhaps months. Why would he? She was invisible, always had been, a silent presence in their Lake Forest mansion, drifting through the rooms like a ghost, existing only on the periphery of his life. 8 years of marriage, and he barely remembered the last time they'd had a real conversation. She simply was there, like the furniture, useful when needed, ignored the rest of the time. "Marcus, I need to use the restroom," Amanda murmured in his ear. He waved a dismissive hand, already turning to Gerald to discuss business. Amanda was decorative, but not foolish enough to interrupt when men were talking serious business. The ballroom was growing fuller, noisier. The orchestra had begun to play something classical and pretentious that Marcus neither recognized nor cared to recognize. People circulated, greeted one another, played their subtle power games through seemingly casual conversations. Marcus was in the middle of a discussion about Gerald's recent acquisition when he felt the shift. It was subtle at first, a silence that spread like ripples through the crowd, starting at the ballroom's main entrance. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as if it too was paying attention. Marcus followed their gazes and felt his stomach lurch. Sebastian Drake had arrived after all, tall, tanned, wearing that perfectly tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than some people's cars. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing those grey eyes that seemed to see through any facade. He smiled as he greeted people near the entrance, utterly comfortable in his own skin, as if he owned not just the ballroom, but the entire city. Marcus felt the familiar rage rise in his throat. Of course Drake had to show up. Of course he had to steal the attention, make his dramatic entrance, remind everyone who really ran Chicago. But then Marcus noticed something that made his heart stop completely. Sebastian wasn't alone. On his arm, Wearing a navy blue dress Marcus had never seen before, was a woman he took 3 full seconds to recognize, because she looked nothing like the person he left at home every morning without a second glance. Evelyn, but not the Evelyn he knew. Not the woman with her hair pulled back in a drab bun, wearing shapeless cardigans and loose trousers, who moved through the house as if apologizing for taking up space. This woman had her hair loose in dark waves that fell over her shoulders. Makeup that highlighted eyes Marcus didn't even remember noticing were green. The dress hugged a body he had never truly looked at, revealing curves he had assumed didn't exist. She was smiling, truly smiling, her eyes shining as she looked at Sebastian, who guided her through the ballroom with his hand respectfully placed on her back, not possessively on her waist, as Marcus did with Amanda. "My God," Gerald whispered beside him. Is that your wife?" Marcus couldn't answer. His throat had closed up. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Evelyn, his Evelyn, here, with Sebastian Drake. The murmur that had begun at the entrance now spread throughout the entire ballroom. Everyone recognized Evelyn, of course. Marcus had brought her to enough events in the early years before deciding she was too monotonous, too bland to impress anyone. She always stayed in the corners, quiet, invisible. But there was nothing invisible about her now. Sebastian led her to the center of the ballroom, where a small stage had been set up for the evening's announcements. Marcus watched paralyzed as his greatest rival took a microphone and smiled at the crowd as if about to share the best secret in the world. "Good evening, everyone," Sebastian's voice echoed through the ballroom, rich and confident. "I know interrupting the party is rude, but I have an announcement that can't wait." Marcus felt every gaze in the ballroom shift between Sebastian and himself. He felt the weight of curiosity, of anticipated malice. They knew something big was about to happen. They could smell blood in the water. "I'd like to officially introduce my new business partner," Sebastian continued, turning to Evelyn with a look Marcus had never directed at her in 8 years of marriage. "Evelyn Marsh will be reverting to her maiden name, as she is assuming the vice presidency of Drake Industries." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. Vice presidency. Evelyn had barely worked a day in her life. She knew nothing about business, about the corporate world. This had to be some cruel joke by Sebastian, but Sebastian wasn't finished. "And," he said, his voice cutting through the buzz like a blade, "I have the honor of announcing that Evelyn has accepted my proposal of marriage." Marcus's world crumbled. He watched, unable to move, unable to breathe, as Sebastian took a box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a ring that sparkled even under the ballroom's soft lights. Evelyn extended her hand, trembling slightly, and Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger with a gentleness that made something twist painfully in Marcus's chest. The crowd applauded. Some even shouted congratulations. And through it all, Evelyn finally looked in his direction. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Marcus expected to see pain or perhaps tears. He expected to see the submissive woman he knew, silently begging forgiveness for causing a scene. But all he saw was a cold calm and a strength he never knew she possessed. Amanda's hand found Marcus's arm, but he barely registered the touch. Every cell in his body was focused on the woman on stage, on the way the light from the crystal chandelier drew soft shadows on her neck, on the way she held Sebastian's hand as if it belonged there, as if it had always belonged there. "Marcus?" Amanda's voice sounded distant, muffled as if coming from underwater. "Marcus, what's happening?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to understand when, how, why. Evelyn never left the house without telling him, and even then only for her yoga classes or the grocery store. She had no friends, no social life. She spent her days reading those boring books in the home library, or tending to the garden he never paid attention to. She was nothing, an empty space he had filled with his own importance. But the woman on stage was anything but empty. She radiated something that made people lean forward, pay attention. When Sebastian whispered something in her ear, she laughed, a crystalline sound that cut through the ballroom's buzz, and Marcus realized with a shock that he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh. Evelyn has developed a revolutionary proposal for sustainable expansion in the technology sector, Sebastian continued, his hand still resting on her back with that proprietary gentleness that made Marcus's jaw clench. In the coming months, we will be implementing her strategies throughout Drake Industries. I am confident we will see extraordinary results. Gerald whistled softly beside Marcus. Revolutionary proposal? Your wife understands technology? Marcus wanted to shout no, that Evelyn barely knew how to use a cell phone, that she spent her days in her domestic insignificance. But then he remembered the laptop always open on the library table, the way she angled the screen away when he passed, not because she was hiding something, but because he had never shown enough interest to ask. The piles of books on business and innovation he had assumed were just decoration, because who would really read those for pleasure? We need to go, Marcus said abruptly, searching for Amanda with eyes that couldn't quite tear away from the stage. Go? But we just got here, Amanda protested, but something in his face must have revealed the panic he felt rising in his throat, because she closed her mouth and merely nodded. Sebastian and Evelyn descended from the stage amidst applause and congratulations. People swarmed around them, eager to be the first to offer congratulations, to make connections with the new vice president of Drake Industries. Marcus watched Richard Chen, of Chen Technologies, kiss Evelyn's hand with exaggerated reverence. He saw Margaret Foster, who commanded half of Chicago's real estate investments, pull her into an animated conversation. Everyone acting as if Evelyn had always been someone important, someone worthy of attention, as if he were the madman for having ignored her all these years. Marcus started to move toward the exit, pulling Amanda with him, but the ballroom seemed to have tripled in size. Every step was an effort, every breath a conscious labor. He needed to get out of there, he needed to think, he needed to understand what the hell was going on. Marcus Caldwell. Sebastian's voice froze him in place. He turned slowly, forcing a neutral expression onto his face, and found his rival smiling at him with that casual arrogance that always made him want to punch something. Drake, Marcus managed to say, surprised by the control in his own voice. What a surprise to see you here. I thought you were in London. Change of plans, Sebastian replied. And then Evelyn was there, standing beside him, so close Marcus could smell the perfume she wore. It wasn't the soft floral scent he vaguely associated with her. This was richer, more complex, jasmine and something dark, woody. Some commitments are too important to postpone. Sebastian's gaze fell upon Amanda, who was clinging to Marcus's arm with increasing tightness. You must be Amanda. I've heard a lot about you. The tone was polite, but there was an underlying sharpness. Amanda blushed, whether from flattery or embarrassment. Marcus didn't know and didn't care. All his attention was on Evelyn, who was watching him with that same calm expression, as if he were a stranger she was assessing on the street. Evelyn, he said, and the word came out harsher than he intended. We need to talk. Do we? She tilted her head slightly, and Marcus noticed the earrings sparkling in her ears. Real diamonds, judging by the way they caught the light. He had never given her diamonds, never given her anything, in fact, except indifference. About what exactly? About this. He gestured vaguely between her and Sebastian. About what you think you're doing. Something flickered in her eyes too quickly for Marcus to identify, but her voice remained serene as she replied, I'm moving on with my life, Marcus. Something I should have done years ago. You can't just... He stopped, aware of the curious glances around them, of the whispers multiplying like wildfire through dry straw. He lowered his voice. You're my wife. Am I? Evelyn asked, and this time there was a sharpness in her tone, a blade hidden in velvet. Funny, I haven't felt like your wife in a very long time. In fact, I don't remember the last time you even looked at me long enough to remember my name. Marcus felt the blood rush to his face. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic, she repeated as if tasting the word. You know, Marcus, I spent 8 years being invisible. 8 years disappearing a little more each day while you pretended I didn't exist. And you know what I discovered? That being invisible has its advantages. People don't pay attention when you're learning, growing, planning. Sebastian placed a hand on her shoulder. a protective gesture that made Marcus's rage erupt into flames. "Evelyn, we don't have to do this here." "No, it's all right," she said, but her fingers found Sebastian's and intertwined with a familiarity that suggested this wasn't new, that this touch was something rehearsed, practiced. How many times had they touched like this? How many secret meetings had Marcus never noticed because he was too busy with Amanda, with his business, with his own inflated importance? "How long?" Marcus asked, and hated how his voice sounded small, broken. Evelyn seemed genuinely confused. "How long what?" "You and him," Marcus spat the words like venom. "How long have you been together?" For a moment, something like disappointment crossed her face, as if she expected more from him even now. "I met Sebastian 6 months ago at a conference on technological innovation in San Francisco. I was there presenting a proposal I'd been developing for the past 3 years. Years I spent studying, researching, building something from scratch while you were busy building your parallel life." 3 years? Marcus couldn't process it. "You were working on a business proposal for 3 years and never told me." "You never asked," Evelyn replied simply. "You never asked what I did with my days, what I read, what interested me. I was just part of the house, Marcus. Less important than the furniture, because at least you noticed when something was out of place." Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him, and Marcus realized she was hearing every word, as was half the ballroom pretending not to pay attention while avidly watching the drama unfold. "So this is revenge?" Marcus asked, clinging to anger because it was easier than admitting the pain growing in his chest. "You want to publicly humiliate me? Make me look like a fool?" "No," Evelyn said, and her voice was so tired, Marcus almost believed her. "This has nothing to do with you, it has to do with me, finally, for the first time in 8 years, doing something for myself, living my own life instead of existing in the shadows of yours." "With him," Marcus glared at Sebastian with all the hatred he felt. "Of all the people in Chicago, you choose my biggest rival." Sebastian smiled, and there was something predatory about it. "Actually, Marcus, I was the one who chose. When I saw Evelyn's proposal, when I talked to her and realized the brilliance you'd ignored all these years, I knew she was exactly what Drake Industries needed. The engagement came later, when I realized she was exactly what I needed too." "You planned this," Marcus said, looking between the two of them. "You planned to humiliate me here in front of everyone." "The world doesn't revolve around you, Marcus," Evelyn said softly yet firmly. "As hard as that might be to believe, my life, my choices, aren't about making you suffer. They're about finally allowing myself to be more than the woman you forgot you had." She turned to Sebastian, and the smile she gave him was so radiant, so genuine, that Marcus felt something break inside him. He had never seen her smile like that, never known she was capable of such light. "We should go," Evelyn said to Sebastian. "We have that dinner with the investors." "Of course," Sebastian agreed, and then looked at Marcus one last time. "Good night, Caldwell. Enjoy the event." Marcus watched them walk away, watched how people parted to let them pass, how everyone wanted to touch Evelyn, talk to her, be near her. He watched how she shone under all that attention, like a flower finally finding the sun after years of darkness, and realized with growing horror that he had no idea who his wife really was. The black limousine disappeared into the Chicago night, carrying Evelyn and Sebastian away from the Pendleton Hotel, and Marcus remained frozen in the same spot, as if his legs had forgotten how to function. Around him, the gala ballroom slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed in whispered tones, punctuated by furtive glances in his direction. He could feel the weight of every gaze, every malicious smile hidden behind champagne flutes. Amanda tugged at his arm more insistently. "Marcus, people are staring. We need to get out of here." He finally managed to move, his feet heavy as lead as he crossed the ballroom. Every step seemed amplified, every breath too audible. Margaret Foster looked away as he passed, but not before Marcus caught the glint of amusement in her eyes. Richard Chen didn't even bother to hide his smile as he whispered something to his wife. The cold October air hit Marcus as soon as he stepped out of the hotel, but it brought no relief he had hoped for. His driver, James, was already waiting with the car, the rear door open. Marcus got in without saying a word, and Amanda slid into the seat beside him, maintaining a careful distance that hadn't existed when they arrived. "Where to, sir?" James asked, his eyes meeting Marcus's in the rearview mirror. "Home," Marcus said, and then realized the problem with that instruction. Which home? The Lake Forest mansion was still technically his and Evelyn's, but was it really? How long had she been planning this departure? How long had she waited for the perfect moment to destroy everything? "The Lake Forest mansion," he clarified, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. Amanda fidgeted nervously with her purse in her lap. "Marcus, maybe it's better if you drop me off at my apartment first." He looked at her for the first time since they had left the ballroom. Amanda seemed smaller somehow, less confident. The red lipstick she had worn so boldly was smudged at the corner of her mouth, and there was a champagne stain on the skirt of her dress that she tried to hide with her hand. "Yes," Marcus agreed, because he truly didn't want company. He didn't want to have to pretend he was fine, that this was just a minor setback he would soon resolve. "James, take Amanda home first." The silence in the car was suffocating. Marcus watched the city lights flash by the window, the loop gradually giving way to residential neighborhoods. His brain kept replaying the scene in the ballroom, every detail etched with painful clarity. Evelyn's navy blue dress, the diamond ring on her finger, the way she had looked at Sebastian Drake as if he were something precious, valuable, as she had never looked at Marcus. When they finally dropped Amanda off at her apartment in Lincoln Park, she hesitated before getting out. "Marcus, if you need to talk—" "I'm fine." He cut her off, and she nodded, clearly relieved not to have to deal with his emotions. The door closed, and they drove on toward Lake Forest. The mansion was dark when they arrived, except for the security lights illuminating the circular driveway. Marcus dismissed James and stood in the entrance for a long moment, looking at the house he had shared with Evelyn for 8 years. It was an impressive property, with its meticulously manicured gardens and restored Victorian architecture. He had bought it to impress, to show off his success. But now, standing there under the night sky, it just felt empty. Marcus opened the front door and was met by the familiar silence. No sound of footsteps, no invisible presence drifting through the rooms. Evelyn was truly gone. He didn't know when she had left, when she had packed her things and disappeared from his life. Had it been today, yesterday, weeks ago? How long had it taken him to even notice? He walked through the hallway to the living room, his shoes echoing on the marble floor. Everything was perfectly in order, as always. The cushions arranged neatly on the sofa, the books organized by color on the shelves, the grand piano polished to a gleam. Marcus had never known Evelyn played piano. He had never cared to ask. He needed a drink. He went to the bar and poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass, drinking half of it in one gulp. The liquid burned his throat, but it didn't bring the numbness he desired. He poured more. His mind kept returning to Sebastian Drake, to the way he had touched Evelyn, gentle yet possessive, to how he had announced their engagement as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 6 months. Evelyn had known Sebastian for only 6 months and was already wearing his ring, working at his company, planning a future with him, while Marcus had known her for 8 years and knew nothing about her. He picked up the glass and went upstairs, his feet automatically carrying him to the master bedroom. The door was ajar, and when he entered, he immediately realized something was different. The room was too clean, too empty. Evelyn's dressing table, which always had a few scattered items, beauty products he'd never paid attention to, was completely clear. Her closet drawers were open, revealing empty spaces. Marcus opened the closet Evelyn used. Half her clothes were gone. Not everything, he noticed. She had left a few dresses, trousers, blouses he vaguely recognized, the drab, shapeless clothes she used to wear, the clothes that made her disappear. She had taken only what she wanted, what made her feel alive. He closed the closet door harder than he intended and threw himself onto the bed, still wearing his tuxedo. The white ceiling stared back at him indifferent. Marcus tried to remember the last time he had truly talked to Evelyn, not quick instructions about the house or social events, but a real conversation. When was the last time he had asked how she was, what she thought, what made her happy? He couldn't remember. It was like trying to grasp smoke. The phone vibrated in his pocket, and Marcus took it out, half expecting to see a message from Evelyn. Some explanation, perhaps even an apology for publicly humiliating him. But it was just Amanda asking if he was okay. He threw the phone onto the nightstand without answering. His gaze fell upon Evelyn's nightstand. There was something there, a folded piece of paper propped against the lamp. Marcus got up and picked it up, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. It was a letter. Evelyn's handwriting was elegant, controlled, each letter perfectly formed. Marcus. If you're reading this, you probably already know I'm gone. Part of me wonders if you'll even notice, if you'll enter this room long enough to see this letter. But I'm writing it anyway because I need to say these things even if you never read them. I spent 8 years disappearing. Each day, a little more of me faded away, until I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. I became what you wanted me to be, invisible, convenient, undemanding, a wife who didn't get in the way, who didn't ask for attention, who existed only on the margins of your important life. For a long time I believed the problem was with me, that I wasn't interesting enough, beautiful enough of anything to deserve your attention. I tried to be smaller, quieter, easier to ignore, thinking that if I demanded nothing, you would eventually notice me. But you never noticed. And then I realized it wasn't about me. It was about you, about your inability to see value in anything that didn't directly serve your purposes. I was useful as a trophy wife at events, as the homemaker who kept your life running perfectly. But as a person, as a human being with dreams, ambitions, a complex inner life, I didn't exist for you. So I stopped existing for myself too. Meeting Sebastian changed that. Not in the way you probably think. He didn't rescue me, he didn't save me. What he did was see me, truly see me. When I presented my proposal at that conference, he listened. He asked questions. He challenged my ideas in ways that made me stronger, more confident. He saw potential where you saw only furniture. The engagement is real, in case you're wondering. I love him, and he loves me back, in a way you were never capable of. But even if Sebastian didn't exist, I would still be leaving, because I finally understood that I deserve more than crumbs of attention. I deserve to be seen, heard, valued. I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect your forgiveness or even your approval. I'm writing this because I need to close this chapter of my life, and perhaps in some small corner of my heart, I still hope you might look at yourself and wonder why you lost something you never knew you had. Goodbye, Marcus. Evelyn. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. His hand crumpled the paper involuntarily, and he had to force his fingers to relax, smoothing the creases against his knee. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. He hadn't ignored her that much. There were moments, surely, conversations he must be forgetting. It wasn't possible that 8 years had passed in complete silence between them, but the more he tried to remember, the more the emptiness grew. Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the library at the end of the hall, the place where Evelyn spent most of her time. He rarely entered there, considering that space her territory in the same way his office was his territory. The door creaked slightly when he opened it. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating rows of books that reached to the ceiling. There was a desk in the corner, and Marcus approached, noticing the closed laptop on it. Beside it, organized stacks of papers, all covered with notes in Evelyn's handwriting, charts, statistics, market analyses. 3 years, she had said. 3 years working on this, while he assumed she did nothing but waste time. Marcus picked up one of the documents. It was a draft proposal on implementing artificial intelligence in traditional corporate structures. The margins were filled with annotations, questions she had asked herself, connections she had established between different concepts. It was brilliant. Even with his limited knowledge of the field, Marcus could see the revolutionary potential of what she was proposing. And she had done all of this alone, without his support, without encouragement, without even knowing if anyone cared. The phone rang again, and this time Marcus answered without looking to see who it was. "Caldwell," he said, his voice raw. "Marcus." It was his lawyer's voice, Leonard Hart. I saw the news. We need to talk about the situation with your wife. Of course. The news was already circulating. Evelyn's engagement to Sebastian would be the headline in Chicago business circles by morning, perhaps even sooner. Tomorrow, Marcus said. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Marcus, this is serious. If she's planning to file for divorce, we need to prepare. Assets, property division. This could get complicated, especially now that she's involved with Drake. I said tomorrow, Marcus repeated, and hung up before Leonard could protest. He went back to the bedroom and lay down again, still holding Evelyn's letter. Outside, he heard the distant sound of a car passing, then silence again. The mansion that had always seemed a symbol of his success now felt like an empty mausoleum, filled with spaces he'd never realized anyone occupied until they were empty. Marcus closed his eyes, but all he saw was Evelyn on stage, shining in a way he had never witnessed, and he realized with terrible clarity that it wasn't Sebastian who had transformed her into that radiant woman. She had always been like that. He just never cared to look. Morning arrived with a grey light seeping through the bedroom curtains, but Marcus had been awake for hours. He hadn't slept properly, his mind circling obsessively around the scene in the ballroom, Evelyn's letter, every wasted moment of the last 8 years. The whiskey he'd drunk had left only a bitter taste in his mouth and a dull ache behind his eyes. He dragged himself to the bathroom and looked at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled, the stubble highlighting every line of fatigue on his face. At 52, Marcus had always prided himself on looking younger, more vital, but the man staring back at him seemed to have aged a decade overnight. His phone already showed 17 missed messages when he finally checked it. Leonard, his lawyer, had sent 6 increasingly urgent messages. There were 3 from Amanda, 2 from Gerald Hutchinson, and the rest were from business contacts, all likely wanting details about the previous night's scandal. Marcus ignored them all and went down to the kitchen. The house felt different in daylight, emptier somehow. Marcus had never noticed how many small touches of Evelyn's were scattered throughout the rooms until they were gone. The fresh flowers that always adorned the kitchen table weren't there. The smell of coffee that usually greeted him in the morning was absent. The small shopping list she kept magnetized on the fridge had vanished. He made his own coffee, something he hadn't done in years, and burned the first attempt. The second cup was bitter and too strong, but he drank it anyway, needing the caffeine to clear the fog from his brain. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to fix this disaster. The Chicago business newspaper arrived while he was drinking his coffee, and Marcus felt his stomach sink when he saw the headline, "Drake Industries VP announces engagement at business gala." There was a large photo of Evelyn and Sebastian, she smiling radiantly as he showed off the ring on her finger. They looked perfect together, as if they had been photographed for the cover of a luxury magazine. The article was worse. It detailed Evelyn's revolutionary proposal, quoted Sebastian praising her bright mind and innovative vision, and mentioned she would be Drake Industries' first female vice president. And then, almost as a footnote, there was a line about her being formally married to Marcus Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries. Formally married, as if that was already in the past, as if he was already irrelevant to her story. Marcus was still staring at the newspaper when the doorbell rang. He got up reluctantly, expecting to find a delivery person or perhaps a nosy reporter. But it was Leonard Hart, his lawyer, holding a leather briefcase and looking irritatingly alert for so early in the morning. "You didn't answer my messages," Leonard said, entering without waiting for an invitation. "So I decided to come in person." "It's too early, Leonard. It's 10:15, Marcus." Leonard walked into the living room and opened his briefcase on the coffee table. "We need to discuss strategy. This could get very ugly very quickly if we don't act carefully." Marcus slumped onto the sofa, rubbing his face with his hands. "What do you suggest?" "First, we need to understand the legal situation. Do you and Evelyn have a prenuptial agreement?" Marcus paused. He tried to remember the weeks before the wedding, the preparations, the documents he had signed. No, we don't." Leonard closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. "Of course not. Okay, so we're looking at a potentially complicated division of assets. Whose name is the mansion in?" "Mine." "Good news. What about the bank accounts, investments?" "All separate. She has her own account, but I never paid attention to how much was in it." Marcus realized how that sounded, how each answer revealed another layer of his negligence. I deposited a monthly sum for household expenses. How much? 5,000 a month. Leonard jotted something down. Over 8 years, that adds up to 480,000. If she saved some of it, she might have a considerable sum, but it's nothing compared to your assets. She won't want my money, Marcus said with more certainty than he felt. The woman he'd seen on stage, confident and radiant in Sebastian Drake's arms, didn't seem to need anything from him. Everyone wants money, Marcus, and she's entitled to a share of everything you built during the marriage. Caldwell Industries has grown significantly over the last 8 years. A judge could see that as marital growth, especially if she argues that she supported your career by maintaining the home, being the corporate wife at events. Marcus laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. She barely showed up at events with me in recent years. Which could work in our favor if we can present it as abandonment of marital duties. Leonard hesitated, then continued carefully. About Amanda. What about her? A publicly known extramarital relationship isn't exactly ideal in divorce cases. Evelyn can use that to argue for a division more favorable to her, especially if what? If she can prove that the relationship caused emotional distress, public humiliation, things like that. With the right testimony, that could sway a judge to be more generous with her. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking at the gardens Evelyn had meticulously cared for over the years. The roses were still blooming, vibrant colors of red and pink and yellow that she had planted and pruned and nurtured while he had never noticed. So you're saying I should break up with Amanda? I'm saying you need to be careful about how you conduct your personal relationships while the divorce is pending. Appearances matter, especially when there's so much money at stake. Always money, Marcus murmured. Always about how much it's worth, how much it costs, how much to lose. Leonard closed his briefcase and stood up. I'll start drafting documents. But Marcus, I need you to be honest with me. Is there any chance of reconciliation here? Because if there is, that's always the simpler option. Marcus thought of Evelyn in Sebastian's arms, the ring she wore, the way she had said she loved him. He thought of the letter she had left, the words about finally being seen, being valued. He thought of 8 years of indifference, of assuming she would always be there because he had never given reason to think otherwise. No, he finally said. I don't think there is. After Leonard left, Marcus returned to Evelyn's library. He spent hours there, reading through her notes, her proposal drafts, her meticulous research. Each page revealed a mind he had never known existed, an ambition she had kept hidden, or that he had simply never cared to see. There was a diary, too, hidden in a bottom drawer of the desk. Marcus hesitated before opening it, knowing he was invading something private, something not meant for his eyes. But the need to understand, to fill the voids of 8 years of willful blindness, was too strong to resist. The first entries were from the beginning of the marriage. Evelyn wrote about hope, about building a life together, about small disappointments she rationalized as normal adjustments. Marcus worked late again today. I know business is important, that he's building something big. I need to be more understanding, more patient. Later entries showed the gradual erosion of that hope. I tried to talk to Marcus about taking a trip together, maybe to the mountains he always says he loves. He just nodded and went back to his laptop. I don't know if he heard a word I said. And then, years later, I spent the whole day reading about artificial intelligence and its applications in corporate structures. It's fascinating. There's so much potential here, so many possibilities. I wish I could share this with someone. But Marcus doesn't ask about my days, and I've stopped trying to tell him. Marcus turned the pages, each entry a portrait of a woman slowly disappearing, until something changed. An entry from 6 months ago, written in a more confident hand. I met someone today, at the conference in San Francisco. His name is Sebastian Drake, and he really listened to my presentation. He asked questions that showed he understood not just the words, but the vision behind them. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The following entries documented the development of Evelyn and Sebastian's relationship. There was nothing sordid or rushed about it. It was a friendship that blossomed into mutual respect, into deep conversations about ambitions and fears, into a connection Marcus had never tried to establish. "Sebastian asked me today what makes me happy," one entry read. I was speechless for a long moment. How long has it been since someone cared about my happiness, since I cared myself? And finally, 3 weeks ago, Sebastian said he loves me, not in the possessive way I'd learned to fear, but in a way that makes me feel free. He wants me to shine, to be all I can be. When I'm with him, I don't have to be small or invisible. I can be myself. I can be more than myself. I said yes when he asked for my hand. Marcus won't even notice I'm gone until it's too late. Marcus closed the diary with trembling hands. She was right. He hadn't noticed. Not when she must have started dressing differently for her meetings with Sebastian. Not when she started spending more time out of the house. Not when she slowly removed her most precious belongings from the mansion. He was so absorbed in his own life, in Amanda, in his business and petty rivalries, that he didn't notice his wife walking out the door. The phone rang again. This time it was Amanda, and Marcus answered because he was tired of avoiding reality. "Marcus, thank God, are you okay? I was so worried." "I'm fine," he lied. "I saw the paper. It's awful what they're saying, as if you're the villain in this whole story." There was genuine indignation in her voice, and Marcus realized that Amanda truly believed it. She saw Evelyn as the intruder, the woman unfairly causing trouble. "Amanda, we need to talk." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a more cautious voice, "About what?" "About us. About how this will look while the divorce is pending." "Are you breaking up with me?" There was more disbelief than pain in her voice, as if the idea was too absurd to consider. "I'm saying we need to be discreet, at least until things calm down." "Discreet." Amanda repeated the word as if it were poison. "You want me to go back to being your little secret? After months of parading me around all of Chicago, now I'm supposed to disappear because your wife finally grew a spine and found someone better." The words cut deep, mostly because they were true. "It's not like that." "Isn't it? Marcus, I made it clear from the beginning that I wouldn't be anyone's other affair. You said your marriage was dead, that it was just a formality. You said Evelyn meant nothing to you." She paused, breathing heavily. "But that's not true, is it? She means something. Maybe not in the way she should, but something. And now that she's gone, you realize what you lost." Marcus wanted to deny it, wanted to argue that it was about legal strategy and public appearances. But it would be another lie in a pile of lies he had been telling himself for years. "You're right," he said simply. "And you deserve someone who can give you more than I can. More than I've given anyone." Amanda laughed, a brittle sound. Finally, a moment of brutal honesty from Marcus Caldwell. "I suppose I should thank Evelyn for that," she sighed. "Goodbye, Marcus. I hope you figure out what you really want before you completely destroy another person." The call ended, and Marcus sat in the silence of Evelyn's library, surrounded by the remnants of a life he had never known. Outside, the clouds finally broke, and rain began to fall over the gardens, washing the roses Evelyn had planted, but would never tend again. The following week passed in a blur of tense meetings with lawyers and lonely nights in the empty mansion. Marcus tried to keep busy, diving into work with an intensity even his employees found excessive. But no matter how many hours he spent at the office, how many contracts he reviewed, or how many meetings he conducted, his mind always returned to Evelyn. To make matters worse, she was everywhere. Not physically, but her presence permeated Chicago in ways Marcus had never imagined possible. The Tribune published a cover story about her AI implementation proposal, with industry experts praising her innovative vision. Forbes included her in its list of women to watch in business. There were even rumors that Sebastian was considering making her not just a vice president, but co-CEO of Drake Industries. Every article, every mention, was a new blade cutting Marcus. Not because of the financial loss or the blow to his ego, although both were significant, but because of the growing realization that he had wasted 8 years alongside someone extraordinary, without ever bothering to truly see her. On Thursday, Marcus received an envelope delivered by messenger. Inside were meticulously prepared divorce documents, Evelyn was asking for very little, in fact. The house in Lake Forest would remain with him, as would most of the assets. She wanted only her freedom and the funds from her personal account, which totaled just over $300,000 she had saved over the years. "She's being too generous," Leonard commented when Marcus showed him the documents. "She could ask for much more. Any competent lawyer would advise fighting for at least half of everything." But Evelyn had never wanted his money. Marcus understood that now. She wanted something he could never give her with all the millions in the world: genuine attention, respect, love that saw her as more than a decorative accessory. On Friday evening, Marcus made the mistake of going to the Sterling Club, his usual refuge for after-work drinks. He should have foreseen it would be a mistake. Gerald Hutchinson was there, along with half a dozen other businessmen Marcus knew from Chicago social circles. The conversation stopped abruptly when he entered, and Marcus saw the exchanged glances, the carefully neutral expressions that hid judgment. "Caldwell," Gerald greeted him, gesturing for the bartender to bring a drink. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." "Why not?" Marcus asked, accepting the whiskey that appeared before him. "I'm still a member, aren't I?" Of course. Gerald stirred his drink uncomfortably. "It's just that, well, with the whole situation with your wife—" "Soon-to-be ex-wife," Marcus corrected, taking a generous swallow. "Yes, about that." Richard Chen leaned forward, and there was something in his eyes Marcus didn't like. A predatory curiosity, perhaps even satisfaction. "Did you know that she was working on that whole proposal, that she had the business mind she apparently does?" Marcus gripped his glass tighter. Evelyn was always smart. "But you never mentioned it," another man, Donald Mercer, added. "In all these years, you never said a word about her being interested in business, let alone developing revolutionary proposals." "I didn't know," Marcus admitted, "because lying now would be pointless. Everyone in Chicago already knew the truth." "She never told me." "Or you never asked," Gerald murmured softly, but not softly enough. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus looked around the circle of men, seeing something reflected in their faces that made him feel physically sick. Pity. They felt pity for him. Marcus Caldwell, who had always been the predator, the alpha, the man others envied and feared, was now an object of pity. "I hear Drake is planning a merger with Tech Vision Corp," Richard said, clearly trying to change the subject, "with Evelyn's proposal as the basis for the expansion. If it works, it'll make Drake Industries the most valuable tech company in the Midwest. More valuable than Caldwell in any category," Donald added, and there was poorly disguised malice in his tone. Marcus finished his drink in one gulp and stood up. "I need to go." He left the club before anyone could protest, feeling their gazes burning into his back. The cold night air offered little comfort as he walked aimlessly through the streets of the Loop. The city pulsed with nightlife, people laughing and talking, couples holding hands, the world carrying on as if Marcus's own hadn't completely fallen apart. His feet carried him, without him consciously planning it, to the Drake Tower. The skyscraper rose against the night sky, its illuminated windows marking the dedicated workers who were still at the office even at 9 in the evening. Marcus looked up, wondering which floor Evelyn's office was on, if she was there now, working on the proposal everyone said was brilliant. "Admiring the competition?" Marcus turned sharply and found Sebastian Drake standing behind him, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, looking younger and more casual than Marcus ever remembered seeing him. There was no escort, no visible security. Just Sebastian, alone on the street like a normal person. "What do you want, Drake?" Marcus asked, too tired to feign civility. "Actually, I was just coming back from dinner when I saw you here standing. You looked sad." Sebastian approached, keeping a respectful distance. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now." "You think?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You stole my wife. Why the hell would I want to see you?" "I didn't steal her," Sebastian said calmly. "You lost her long before I came into the picture. All I did was be there when she finally decided she deserved more." Marcus wanted to punch that calm, understanding face. He wanted to scream that Sebastian understood nothing, that he had no right to judge a marriage he didn't know, but the words died in his throat because he knew Sebastian was right. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked instead. "Why are you being kind to me? You won. You took everything." "I wasn't competing with you, Marcus. I never was." Sebastian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you see me as your great rival, that our whole relationship has been about who can be on top. But for me, you were always just another businessman in Chicago. I respect your work, but I don't wake up every day thinking about how to outdo you." The words should have been insulting, but somehow they were worse for being clearly true. Marcus wasn't even important enough for Sebastian to consider him a real rival. "But Evelyn," Sebastian continued, and his voice grew softer, almost reverent. "She's different. When I met her at that conference, when I heard her ideas, I saw someone with limitless potential that was being wasted. And then I met the person behind the ideas and realized she was even more incredible than her work." "You love her," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. "With every part of me." Sebastian met Marcus's eyes directly. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it, that she is valued, seen, celebrated for everything she is." "Everything I should have done," Marcus said softly. "Yes." Sebastian didn't soften the answer. "But you didn't. And now she has moved on." They stood in silence for a moment, two men in the shadows of the Drake Tower, one of them having gained everything, the other having lost something he never knew he had until it was gone. "She asked me if I wanted to destroy you," Sebastian said finally. "When she was developing the merger with TechVision, she said the strategies we're implementing would likely harm Caldwell Industries, maybe even force you into a secondary market position. She wanted to know if that was revenge, if I was using her work to hurt you." Marcus looked at him, waiting. "I told her the truth, that it wasn't about you, that it was about building something extraordinary with someone extraordinary. If it affects your company, that's just business, nothing personal." Sebastian turned to leave, then stopped. "But I'll give you some advice, Caldwell. Stop seeing your life as a competition with everyone around you. You might have more money than half of Chicago, but what's the point if, in the end, you're alone, without having truly valued the people who mattered?" Sebastian walked away into the night, leaving Marcus alone again. The words echoed in his mind as he finally hailed a taxi, giving up on his aimless walk. In the car, he checked his phone and saw a news notification. Drake Industries announces historic merger with TechVision Corp. The article included a photo of Evelyn and Sebastian making the announcement, both smiling, their hands clasped across the conference table. She wore a navy blue pantsuit Marcus had never seen, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, looking every inch the powerful executive she had always been capable of being. The most liked comment on the article read, "Finally a woman in a real position of power at Drake Industries, and with ideas that will truly change the game. This is the leadership we need." Marcus closed his phone and looked out the window as the taxi drove across the city towards Lake Forest. The mansion would be empty when he arrived, as it had been every night since Evelyn left. No smell of dinner being cooked, no soft sound of classical music coming from the library, no silent presence he had assumed would be eternal. When he finally arrived home, Marcus didn't go to the master bedroom. Instead, he walked to Evelyn's library and sat in her chair, surrounded by her books and notes and all the pieces of a life she had quietly built while he was too busy to notice. He picked up one of the framed photos she kept on the desk. It was of them, taken on their wedding day. Evelyn smiled radiantly, wearing a simple but elegant dress, her eyes full of hope and love. Marcus beside her looked confident, possessive, already looking at the camera instead of his new wife. He remembered that day vaguely. He remembered being annoyed because the ceremony was delayed, eager to get it over with and return to work. He remembered thinking Evelyn was pretty enough, quiet enough, appropriate enough to be the wife of a rising CEO, but he didn't remember truly looking at her, of seeing the woman she was, with her dreams and fears and ambitions. She had always been there waiting to be seen, and he had never cared to look. Marcus spent the next few days like a ghost in his own life, moving mechanically between the office and the empty mansion, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But normalcy was a luxury that no longer existed. Every business meeting was punctuated by thinly veiled looks of pity. Every lunch at the club was interrupted by whispered conversations that abruptly ceased when he approached. All of Chicago knew of his humiliation, and worse, many seemed to believe he deserved it. The merger between Drake Industries and Tech Vision Corp was made official on Tuesday, with Evelyn assuming the role of Director of Strategic Innovation. Business newspapers published detailed analyses of her proposal, with experts predicting that the implementation of her artificial intelligence systems could revolutionize not just Drake Industries, but the entire Midwest tech sector. Sebastian's stock value surged 23% in 2 days. Caldwell Industries shares fell 12% during the same period. Marcus was in his office when his CFO, Patricia Morrison, entered without knocking, holding a tablet with a grave expression. "We need to talk about the financial situation, Marcus." He gestured for her to sit, too tired to feign interest. "How bad is it?" "The stock drop is just the beginning. 3 of our biggest clients contacted us this morning, wanting to discuss contract renewals. All of them mentioned they are considering proposals from Drake Industries." Patricia slid the tablet across the table. "And then there's this." Marcus looked at the screen. It was a Bloomberg article. "The Evelyn Marsh Revolution. How an Invisible Wife Became Chicago's Most Valuable Tech Mind." The article detailed not only her impressive credentials, the online courses she had completed during years of isolation, the data science and artificial intelligence certifications she had quietly obtained, but also mentioned, with brutal delicacy, how her ex-husband Marcus Caldwell had never recognized her potential. There were quotes from people who attended the San Francisco conference, talking about how Evelyn's presentation had been revolutionary, how she had answered complex technical questions with ease and confidence. "She had been preparing for years," Patricia said softly, "building expertise, developing professional connections, all while I assumed she did nothing but exist," Marcus finished. He pushed the tablet back. "What do you recommend?" "Honestly, we need to innovate, and fast. Evelyn's proposal for Drake Industries is years ahead of anything we're developing. If we can't compete technologically, we're going to lose more than just a few clients. We could lose our market relevance." Marcus rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 52 years. "Set up a meeting with the development team. Let's see what we can do." But both knew it was too late. Evelyn had a 3-year head start in research and development, now backed by Sebastian Drake's limitless resources. Caldwell Industries was playing catch-up in a race it had already lost. After Patricia left, Marcus remained alone in his office, looking at the city view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, Chicago continued its relentless routine, indifferent to the personal and professional collapse of a man who had always believed himself indispensable. His phone vibrated. A message from Leonard. "Evelyn has agreed to sign the divorce papers. We can finalize on Friday if you're available." Friday. 2 days until the official end of a marriage that had emotionally ended long before. Marcus should feel relief, perhaps even satisfaction at finally being free. But all he felt was a growing emptiness, a terrible understanding that he was about to sign documents that certified the greatest failure of his life. Not the failure to keep a marriage working, the failure to have never tried. On Thursday evening, Marcus made a mistake he knew was a terrible idea the moment the thought formed. He drove to the Gold Coast apartment building where Evelyn now lived, an address he had discovered through sources he probably shouldn't have used. The building was elegant, modern, all glass and clean lines, so different from the Victorian mansion they had shared. He stood on the other side of the street for almost an hour, watching the illuminated windows of the 8th floor, imagining Evelyn up there, living a life that included nothing of him. Several times he almost crossed the street, almost entered the lobby, almost pressed the intercom to her apartment. But what would he say? Sorry for 8 years of indifference? Sorry for not seeing you until it was too late? Empty words that wouldn't change anything. He was about to drive away when he saw Sebastian exit the building. He carried bags of what looked like Thai food, and there was something so casual, so domestic in the gesture that it made Marcus's stomach churn. Sebastian wasn't just at Evelyn's apartment. He was there regularly enough to go out and get dinner, to know her preferences, to be a part of her daily routine. Marcus turned his car around and left before Sebastian could see him, feeling pathetic and small. Friday arrived with brutal clarity. Marcus woke up in the mansion for the last time as a married man, dressed in his best suit as armor against what was to come, and drove to Leonard's office. Evelyn was already there when he arrived, sitting in the conference room with her own lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Diana Reese. This was the first time Marcus had seen Evelyn up close since the night of the gala. She wore a grey dress that highlighted her green eyes, her hair loose in soft waves that framed her face. There was a calm about her, a serenity he had never associated with the woman he had known, or thought he had known. "Marcus," she greeted him politely, as if he were a distant acquaintance, and not the man she had shared a home with for 8 years. "Evelyn." He sat on the opposite side of the table, maintaining as much distance as possible in the confined space. Leonard distributed copies of the final documents, explaining the clauses that had already been agreed upon. The division of assets was surprisingly simple. Evelyn wanted nothing beyond what she had brought into the marriage and the money she had saved. No alimony, no fights over properties, no prolonged battles. She only wanted her freedom. "If both parties are satisfied with the terms," Diana said, pushing a pen towards Evelyn, "we can proceed with the signatures." Marcus watched Evelyn take the pen, her hand steady and sure as she signed her name on each marked page, without hesitation, without looking back. When she reached the last page, she paused briefly, her eyes meeting his across the table. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own voice. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "I've been sure for a long time, Marcus. It just took time to find the courage to act." She signed the last page and pushed the documents across the table. It was Marcus's turn now. He looked at his own name printed beside hers, Marcus James Caldwell and Evelyn Rose Marsh, about to be officially separated by law. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. Not because he doubted that divorce was the right choice, it was, but because each signature was an admission that he had wasted 8 years of someone's life, letting her wither in his indifference when she could have been flourishing elsewhere. "Marcus," Leonard nudged him gently, "we need the signatures to finalize." Marcus signed, page after page, his name in black ink certifying the end of something that had never truly begun. When he finished, Diana efficiently collected the documents, placing them in her leather brief. "I'll file these documents today," she said. "The divorce will be finalized in approximately 30 days after the mandatory state waiting period." 30 days. A month for the complete end of their marriage. It seemed arbitrary, considering the actual marriage had ended long before that. Evelyn stood, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Thank you, Diana." "Leonard." She nodded to both lawyers, then looked at Marcus one last time. "Take care, Marcus." She was at the door when Marcus finally found his voice. "Evelyn, wait." She stopped, turning slowly. There was no anger on her face, no resentment, only a distant politeness that was somehow worse than any negative emotion would have been. Marcus stood, conscious of the 3 pairs of eyes watching him. I need to say something." "Marcus?" "I don't think it's appropriate," Leonard began, but Marcus ignored him. "You were right," he said, the words tumbling out in an awkward rush. "In your letter about everything. I made you invisible. I never asked about your days, your dreams. What made you happy? I treated you like furniture, exactly as you said. And I'm sorry." Evelyn remained quiet for a long moment. "I know you are, Marcus, but it doesn't change anything. I know. I needed you to know that I finally understand. What I lost. Who you always were." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "You are extraordinary, Evelyn. You always were. And I'm grateful you finally found someone who sees that." Something flickered in her eyes. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a kind of peace. "Thank you for saying that. It means something to hear you acknowledge the truth." "Sebastian is a lucky man," Marcus added, and this time there was no bitterness in the words, only fact. "Yes, he is," Evelyn agreed simply. "And I'm a lucky woman to have found someone who values me, who wants to see me succeed, grow, shine. That's what love should be, Marcus. Not possession or control or indifference, but genuine celebration of who the other person is." She turned to leave again, then stopped one last time. "I hope you find that too someday. With someone you truly see, who you cherish, who you love in the right way. Everyone deserves that, even you." And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded completely. Marcus stood in the conference room, surrounded by papers that legally ended his marriage, but did nothing to heal the growing hollow in his chest. "Are you all right?" Leonard asked eventually. Marcus looked at his lawyer, at Diana, who was discreetly packing her brief, at the empty room where Evelyn had been moments before. "No," he said honestly, "but I will be." He didn't know if that was true, but it was all he had at the moment. That night, Marcus returned to the mansion and finally did what he should have done weeks ago. He took down every photo of Evelyn still hanging on the walls, every memento of a marriage that had never truly existed, and carefully packed them into boxes. Not to forget her, but to stop pretending she still belonged in that life. In the process, he found a picture he didn't remember seeing before. It was of Evelyn in the garden, taken perhaps 2 years ago. She wasn't posing for the camera. Instead, she was kneeling among the roses, her face concentrated as she carefully pruned them. There was dirt on her hands, and her hair was tied back messily, and she looked absolutely beautiful in her total absorption in the work. Marcus wondered who had taken the photo. It hadn't been him. He had never been interested enough in Evelyn's passions to document them. Perhaps she had set up a timer herself, capturing a moment of pure joy she shared only with herself. He placed that photo on his bedside table, the only remnant of Evelyn he would keep visible. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder that people were not furniture, that attention mattered, that love was not just a word, but actions repeated day after day, choices made to truly see and cherish someone completely. Lessons he had learned too late for his marriage, but perhaps in time to save something of himself. The next 2 months unfolded like a slow, relentless storm. Marcus watched, powerless, as Drake Industries grew exponentially under Evelyn's visionary leadership. Every newspaper article was a fresh stab, every mention of her success a reminder of what he had squandered. The implementation of her artificial intelligence system surpassed all predictions, revolutionizing not just Drake Industries, but setting new standards for the entire tech industry. Caldwell Industries, on the other hand, slowly bled. Not a dramatic collapse that Marcus could fight with the aggression that had always characterized his business, but a steady erosion. Clients migrated to Drake Industries, drawn by the innovations Evelyn championed. Investors questioned the company's strategic direction. The board began to ask increasingly difficult questions to which Marcus had no satisfactory answers. Patricia presented more troubling figures on a particularly cold January morning. Revenue had dropped 28% in the last quarter. 3 senior directors had resigned, recruited by the competition. Employee morale was at its lowest recorded point. Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his decaying empire, and tried to find the familiar rage, that competitive fury that had always driven him. But all he felt was weariness, and a growing understanding that this battle could not be won with the same tactics he had used for decades. Not because Evelyn was a ruthless opponent, but because she had never been competing with him. She had simply moved on, building something extraordinary while he remained stuck in old patterns that no longer worked. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning without fanfare. Marcus received the final documents by email, certified and stamped, declaring the legal end of his marriage to Evelyn Rosemarsh. She had already reverted to her maiden name in all aspects of her life, and Marcus realized there was nothing left to connect her to him, 8 years erased with a few signatures and official stamps. That night, he stayed in what had been Evelyn's library, drinking overly expensive whiskey and rereading her notes for the 100th time. There was something hypnotic in seeing her thoughts organized on paper, the gradual development of ideas that would eventually become the proposal that changed Chicago's tech landscape. Each page revealed a brilliant mind working in isolation, building something from scratch without support or recognition. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was an unknown number, but Marcus answered anyway. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Rebecca Martinez from the Chicago Business Review. I'm working on an article about Evelyn Marsh's transformation and would like to include your perspective." Marcus should have hung up. But there was something in the journalist's voice, a genuine curiosity rather than malicious sensationalism seeking, that made him hesitate. "What exactly do you want to know?" "The truth, Mr. Caldwell. Everyone in Chicago is talking about how the invisible ex-wife became the city's most innovative executive. But no one is asking about the other side of the story. What is it like to watch someone you knew transform into something you seemingly never saw?" Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered gardens Evelyn had tended so carefully. The roses were dormant now, just bare branches awaiting spring. He wondered if they would bloom again without her care. "It's devastating," he said finally, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Because you realize the problem was never that she wasn't extraordinary. It was that you were too blind to see." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "May I quote you on that?" "Yes." Marcus felt something release in his chest. "And you can add this too. Evelyn Marsh deserves every success she is achieving, not out of vengeance or to prove something to me, but because she was always capable of it. I spent 8 years assuming that someone who didn't demand attention didn't deserve attention. I learned, too late, that the most remarkable people are often those who bloom in silence, waiting only for someone to care enough to truly look." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, Rebecca asking questions that forced Marcus to confront uncomfortable truths about his marriage, his arrogance, his inability to see value in anything that didn't directly serve his purposes. When he finally hung up, Marcus felt exhausted but strangely lighter, as if publicly confessing his failures was a necessary step on some journey he didn't yet fully understand. The article was published a week later, with the title, "Lessons from a Man Who Lost Everything by Never Looking." It was brutally honest, using Marcus's own words to paint a portrait of arrogance and emotional neglect. The online comments were divided. Some praised him for his vulnerability, others condemned him for seeking sympathy. But the reaction that surprised him most came from Evelyn. She sent a short message through her lawyer. "Thank you for being honest. It was more than I expected, and it means more than you know." Marcus read the message repeatedly, searching for hidden meanings or sarcasm, but it seemed genuine, a small gesture of grace from someone who owed him nothing. He didn't reply, knowing any words would be inadequate, but he kept the message as a talisman of possibility, that perhaps eventually he could become a better version of himself. Spring arrived in Chicago with its usual renewal. The trees along Lakeshore Drive burst into vibrant green, and the city emerged from its winter hibernation with renewed energy. Marcus began to make changes, small at first, but each representing a break from the patterns that had defined him for decades. He hired a new human resources director with a specific mandate to improve Caldwell Industries' corporate culture. He implemented work-life balance policies that he previously would have considered weakness. He started to truly listen during meetings, instead of simply waiting for his turn to speak. These were modest changes, but the effects rippled through the company like waves on a calm lake. Patricia noticed the difference during an executive meeting in April. "You're different," she said after the others had left. "More present, somehow." Marcus considered denying it or making a deflective joke, but honesty had become a habit he didn't want to break. "I'm trying to be the person I should have been a long time ago. I don't know if it's working, but I'm trying." "It is working," Patricia assured him. Employee morale improved 22% last quarter. People are staying because they feel seen, valued. It's a more sustainable foundation than the fear that used to keep everyone here. Caldwell Industries was still behind Drake Industries in innovation and market value, but the bleeding had stopped, and Marcus began to see the outline of something new emerging. Not the ruthless domination he had once aimed for, but a company built on more solid foundations of mutual respect and genuine appreciation of its people. On a May afternoon, Marcus did something that would have been unthinkable months ago. He attended a conference on transformational leadership, where Evelyn was the keynote speaker. He sat in the last row of the crowded auditorium, watching as she commanded the stage with natural grace and profound knowledge that captivated the audience. She spoke about innovation, but also about humanity in business, about seeing potential in people rather than just their immediate utility, about creating environments where everyone could flourish, not just those who shouted loudest or demanded the most attention. Her words were a gentle but devastating refutation of everything Marcus had once believed about leadership. After the lecture, during the reception, their eyes met across the crowded hall. Evelyn held a glass of wine, animatedly talking with a group of executives, but paused when she saw him. For a moment they simply looked at each other, two strangers who had once shared a life but never truly known each other. Then Sebastian appeared beside her, his hand automatically finding hers, and the moment passed. Evelyn smiled at her fiancé, and Marcus saw in that smile everything she could never have given him, because he had never cared to deserve it. Sebastian guided her out of the hall, and Marcus watched them leave, finally able to feel genuine happiness for her. That night, Marcus returned to the mansion that he was slowly transforming from a mausoleum into a real home. He had hired a gardener who knew Evelyn's roses, ensuring they would bloom again even without her. He donated half of his excessive wardrobe and converted one of the guest rooms into a personal library. Small changes that signaled a willingness to live differently. He sat in his new library, surrounded by books he actually planned to read instead of just display, and wrote a letter. Not to Evelyn. She had moved on and didn't need his words, but to himself, documenting the lessons learned through devastating loss. He wrote about seeing people as furniture and the terrible cost of that blindness, about assuming that silent presence meant absence of value, about confusing domination with leadership, control with love, possession with partnership, about all the ways he had failed not only Evelyn but himself, building a life based on empty foundations of power and status. And he wrote about starting over at 52, about learning lessons he should have learned decades earlier, about the painful humility of recognizing that professional success meant nothing if built on the ruins of destroyed relationships and wasted opportunities for real human connection. When he finished, Marcus folded the letter and placed it in an envelope addressed to himself. He didn't know if he would ever reread it, but the act of writing felt important, a marker of where he had been and where he hoped to go. Outside, spring turned to summer, and Chicago continued its eternal dance of ambition and reinvention. Somewhere in the city, Evelyn was building a brilliant future with someone who valued her completely. And in the mansion in Lake Forest, Marcus was finally beginning the difficult work of learning to value not only other people, but also himself in deeper ways than money or power could measure. Evelyn's roses bloomed that summer, more vibrant than ever, living reminders that beauty persists even when those who cultivated it move on. And Marcus, for the first time in decades, paused long enough to truly see them, to appreciate their complexity and fragility, to understand that the most valuable things in life were often those that never demanded attention, only waited patiently for someone to care enough to look.